Hello and welcome to Chapter 30 of the American Pageant, The War to End War, 1917 and 1920 we're looking at here. We're going to be covering the first section here, the war by act of Germany to suffrage, suffering through until suffrage, excuse me. We've got a picture here of the men fighting World War I, famous for its trench warfare and whatnot and all that good stuff, so let's get right into it. Germany, who had been doing their unrestricted submarine warfare, sunk the Lusitania, sunk the Sussex, made the United States really upset, said, hey, we'll stop. They issued the Sussex Pledge, and basically said they would warn the United States if they attacked. Desperate to break through and desperate to win the war because it's such a stalemate, they lift their ban on unrestricted submarine warfare on January 31st, 1917. The thinking was even if the United States joined the war, they had big things planned. Russia had pulled out of the war, or was close to pulling out of the war, and so they were planning a big offensive in the West, on the Western Front. So they thought they could win the war before the United States ever joined. And so then there's this kind of mysterious note. A German foreign secretary named Arthur Zimmerman secretly proposed a German-Mexican alliance with the Zimmerman Note. It was a secret telegram sent to a Mexican foreign secretary, basically saying, hey, if you guys join us, we'll give you some of your lost land back from the Mexican-American War, like Arizona and Mexico. British intelligence found this, and they gave it to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government published it. And so news of this leaked out to the public, infuriating Americans. So remember, the United States had troops in Mexico at this time trying to capture Pancho Villa and his men. America had been meddling in the Mexican Civil War. So the fact that Germany would try to instigate war with Mexico to attack the United States really, really upset a lot of Americans. You also have Russia being, the Tsar was toppled. The Tsar abdicated his throne, and so Russia became temporarily, just for a matter of months, a democracy. And so the tale of the tape was that the Allies were pretty much democracies versus the Central Powers, who were empires. And so it was kind of the American way of life. It was a fight for that. It also helped, not help, but it hurt that Germany sunk 4 more ships. And so even though Woodrow Wilson ran on the motto of 1916 campaign that he kept us out of war, literally just a month after inauguration day into his second term, we go to war. So on April 2nd, 1917, President Wilson asked for a declaration of war from Congress for the 4th time in American history. Congress grants a declaration of war. That's less than 1 month after he was inaugurated. The United States declared war on April 6, 1917 against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Central Powers. Here's the decoded Zimmerman Note. Like I said, it was published. I've always thought it was a little fishy. The British intelligence found it, but it's supposedly legit. It wasn't really going to happen. It was just kind of this wild pipe dream kind of proposal and wasn't really supposed to mean anything, but it really infuriated Americans. I always thought that the British maybe doctored it or planted it because who stood to gain the most from the United States joining the war? Britain and France. So you can do conspiracy theories if you want. This is the New York Times headline. President calls for war declaration, stronger Navy, new army of 500,000 men, full cooperation with German foes. Wilson idealism. So 6 senators and 50 representatives voted against the war. It wasn't a universal slam dunk. Not all Americans wanted to go to war with the Central Powers. They thought this is a European war. Let's stay out of this. Jeanette Rankin of Montana, who's the first congresswoman elected, she opposed the war. President Wilson, to get American support, to get Americans behind it, to get people to sign up for the war, called it a war to end war. Really? Oh, okay. So we fight one time and we're never going to have a war again? Okay. Maybe we can get on board for that. He's lying, by the way. Also, the war was to make the world safe for democracy. Hey, that's our way of life. That makes us feel good. We're doing something good. Yeah, we can do that. Maybe. No, it's up to you. I don't know. So he's the moral leader of the Allies. Remember, Wilson's very pretentious. He's very uppity. He thinks he's better than everyone, to put it lightly. He delivered his 14 points of peace address to Congress on January 8th, 1918. It was the moral cause of the war and the post-war peace for Europe. Basically, let's remake the world after this terrible calamity that was the Great War. The first 5 points and their effects were a proposal to abolish secret treaties, which pleased liberals in all countries, so no more secret alliances to bring in countries into war that don't need to be. Freedom of the seas appealed to the Germans as well as the Americans, who distrusted the massive British sea power. Removal of economic barriers among nations, comforting to Germany, which feared post-war vengeance. So we're kind of talking about lowering tariffs here. Reduction of armament burdens was gratifying to taxpayers instead of this big arm race. We don't need these giant militaries. If everyone just kind of reduces their military, taxpayers don't pay as much money. That's good. And an adjustment of colonial claims in the interest of both native people and the colonizers was reassuring to anti-imperialists, which Europeans kind of scoffed at this, by the way. The largest point, though, we'll skip a bunch of them, was number 14. Wilson wanted to create this new worldwide peacekeeping organization called the League of Nations that would be there in place to prevent something like the Great War from happening when cooler heads could have prevailed. So the committee, to get people signed up for the war, to get them enthusiastic, they kind of needed some advertising. Not a lot of Americans were really gung-ho about this. And so the Committee on Public Information was created to rally public war support. And so there's posters, there's songs, there's, campaigns to conserve materials for voluntary rationing. You have the Broadway musical writer George M. Cohan, who pens the very famous song Over There, which if you ever watch any World War I documentary, in the background you'll hear over there, over there. I can't sing, but oh well. Send the word over there. You can probably find it on YouTube, and it's much better. That's George M. Cohan. George CREEL, his job was to sell America on the war and to sell the world on Wilsonian war goals. So you have these posters, you have enlist on which side of the window are you? Are you going to be in there in your nice tuxedo or out there with the men? Remember Belgium. They were violated by these dirty Germans, who they called the Huns, buy bonds, forthwith Liberty Loan. People would buy these bonds, and it was like a temporary loan to the government, and they had competitions. They would publish in the newspaper which colony or which counties, I'll try to learn how to speak tonight, which counties, which towns, which cities, municipalities would raise the most money. And it was this kind of friendly competition going on. Defeat the Kaiser and his U-boats. Victory depends on which fails first, food or frightfulness. Eat less wheat. You need to eat less carbs, fatty. They're just trying to conserve wheat. I'm not calling you fat. I'm sorry. It's okay. Be patriotic. Sign your country's pledge to save the food. U.S. Food Administration. So they did voluntary rationing during World War I. And it was Herbert Hoover, really the future president, who kind of organizes this and comes up with this really brilliant campaign. He had previously started a food campaign or a food rally for the starving Belgians, and he was a Stanford grad, very rich man from the mining industries, and he just knew he was a logistics man. He knew how to get stuff done. Some other posters, another ship, another victory, hip hip, Hun or home, buy more Liberty bonds. Look at this lurking evil Hun and this woman, she's almost crying blood, tears, and the baby, beat back the Hun with Liberty bonds, halt the Hun, buy U.S. government third Liberty bonds. We got all these, the evil Germans here. Destroy this mad brute. And he's on the shores of America with his culture terrors, stealing Lady Liberty, who's looks like she's maybe a little undressed. Sorry about that. Enlist in the U.S. Army. Help Uncle Sam stamp out the Kaiser. Buy U.S. bonds. So these were all over the country. This is what they did to sell the war. Now, you need to study history because the poster on the left here with the giant ape and the Lady Liberty, very famous poster, and one of my favorite athletes, posed for a magazine cover, not knowing that maybe you should study a little history. My man LeBron James and Giselle, John Brady's wife, posed in Vogue magazine. It was very similar, kind of strange. If LeBron studied history, maybe he would have done the photo shoot. Teamwork wins. Your work here makes their work over there possible. With their help, they could be invincible. Without it, they're helpless. Eat more corn, oats, rye, products, fish and poultry, fruit and vegetables, potatoes, baked, boiled, and broiled goods. Eat less wheat, meat, sugar, and fats. That sounds like a good diet, actually. Maybe I should do that. Can I still eat tacos? Because tacos are amazing. So then I got, these are amazing. I know you're probably like, why are we looking at pictures? Sometimes pictures do a lot. Arthur S. Mole and John D. Thomas did these photographs with men from army bases across the country. They did these from 1915 until 1921. And what they would do is they would go up in an 80-foot tower, and one of them would be in a camera, and they would draw on a glass pane the outline, and then they would shout down with a megaphone like where to lay some lace edging, and then they would bring in the men and stand there, and they were color coordinated. So this Statue of Liberty had 18,000 officers in Des Moines, Iowa. This American Eagle here, these are all men. You can look very closely. You know that these are, it's an actual photograph. It's pretty amazing that they did this. There's 12,500 men in this photograph. This one's Woodrow Wilson. There's 21,000 people here in Camp Sherman, Ohio. There's probably some crazy old guy that probably lost his marbles one day and was like, you know, one day in World War I was Woodrow Wilson's nostril. Like, what, Grandpa? You're crazy. He was that guy in the picture right there. There's that's pretty good. I can't even draw that. I mean, you could give me a sheet of paper and like 20,000 attempts, and I don't think I could draw anything that good. They're good. They're talented. I mean, look at those stars. Even if I did the up, down, over, whatever, that thing, I can't even make a star that good. These are pretty amazing, actually. This one was done late in the day. You can see the shadows over here. Then you have the Liberty Bell. There's 25,000 men in this one. You have this, you know, star flag banner. This kind of shows the, you know, how many stars the people display on these flags, which show how many men they had serving overseas. And then this is a machine gun insignia. 22,500 men made a machine gun. Look at that. They made a machine gun. They're kind of laying down on this one. Kind of neato, huh? All right, back to the notes. Sorry. Enforcing loyalty and stifling dissent. Because it's not a popular war. There's over 8 million German Americans in America. Many of them changed their names. They stopped using names, you know, German names for like sauerkraut became, you know, Liberty Cabbage and things like that. Many of them were accused of being spies and sabotage. There was a hysterical hatred of Germans and things that swept the nation. German music, German schools, German food, German beverages. One of the many reasons they banned alcohol was to try to save wheat for the men, and they didn't want drunk men going off the war. And it was also to take down those German beer barons. Which, yeah, they were German descent, but they lived here for decades. You know, the founder of Coors, Adolf Coors, and Frederick Miller, and Augustus Busch. I mean, these were the big brewers, and they lived here for generations, but they were beer barons from Germany. So Germans, the Irish don't ever want to help anything with Britain. Socialists and pacifists all opposed the war. And so the government passed a couple things that were very controversial. The Espionage Act in 1917 banned aiding the enemy or interfering with recruiting. Yeah, okay, yeah, if we're at war, you probably shouldn't help the enemy. I can get on board with that. The Sedition Act of 1918 made it illegal to say, print, or write anything negative about the government. I hope that you're in your head going, wait a second, somewhere I've read or I've heard about this thing called freedom of speech, that I can say things about the government if I wanted. Well, during the war, they took away the First Amendment right. Socialist Eugene Debs went to jail over this. Industrial workers of the world, IWW leader William Hayward, were convicted on the Espionage Act and spent the rest of the war in jail. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld these, and in a time of crisis, they could take away civil liberties and schnick, I think that's how you say it, versus the United States in 1919. It argued that freedom of speech could be revoked for such speech posed a danger to the nation. We have another really shocking example of propaganda. This is some Belgian propaganda. It says, "For God, Vaterland und Konig," which is for God, country, and king. And you have a German stabbing a young child in the heart with a bayonet. Okay, that's really tragic and sad. I'm sorry. Here's Eugene Debs. He actually ran for president in 1920 from jail and got almost 1 million votes. That's impressive. Wow. The factories go to war. Before the war, Wilson created the Civilian Council of National Defense to study problems of economic mobilization. So they had to convert consumer goods over to wartime goods. And, you know, the old saying is guns and butter. They had to stop making butter or consumer goods and make guns. And so they had to, employ the factories of the nation to supply not only the American troops, but the rest of the Allies with whatever they needed. So they had a small-scale increase of the Army and Navy. There was fears that big government would restrict efforts to coordinate the economy from Washington, and so Wilson appointed Bernard Baruch, the head of the War Industries Board, who saw this conversion. He set the precedent of how the federal government would handle the economy in times of crisis, and really the blueprint for the big war, World War II, was really laid out in World War I. How to convert the economy over to a wartime economy, how to get people motivated to fight for the war, how to finance it, how to save and conserve materials and foodstuffs and things like that. Workers, they stated that labor will win the war. The War Department issued a worker fight rule in 1918. Basically, you get off your hiney and go get a gun or get a job. Strikes would hurt the supplies of the Allies, and so if you go on strike, if the factories close down, men could die, so don't go on strike. And so they were discouraged from striking to help the war effort. The National War Labor Board tried to fix labor disputes before they hurt the war effort. It was headed by former President Taft. You have the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, who had some of the worst working conditions of the country, and they kind of unite. The IWW is coming. They did not support the war. They protested. Like I already said, their leader went to jail. You have the AFL, the former group of Samuel Gompers, supported the war. Membership, because of their support, doubled by the end of the war. Inflation, though, prices go up because there's such an influx of cash from government contracts into the economy. Inflation reduced wage gains, and it led to thousands of strikes across the country. You have a lot of labor unrest, especially after the war in 1919. The greatest strike in American history hit the steel industry, and so there's labor strike after labor strike, and immediately after the war in 1919. More than 250,000 steel workers go on strike, seeking the right to organize, collectively bargain. During this time, you also have the Great Migration, in which thousands of African Americans moved out of the South into the North in search for wartime industry employment, working in the factories. So, we have a picture here of the steel strike in Pittsburgh in 1919. That guy looks like he's doing something, maybe some police brutality there, I'm not sure. You also have race riots that go on in Chicago in 1919, and the 1920s chapter will come back to this and talk about this horrible, horrible incident that went on. And then our last slide today, suffering until suffrage. Thousands of women worked in the factories. It's not on like the larger scale as World War II, but when the men go off to fight, some women take their jobs. They work in the fields. They replace the men who were fighting. The National Women's Party, led by Alice Paul, protested the war, actually. But the larger part of the suffrage movement, represented the National American Woman Suffrage Association, supported the war, and they did their part. And almost as a reward for it, finally women gained the national right to vote in 1920. Impressed by this work, Wilson supported the passage of the 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920. It gave all Americans, women, the right to vote, which is 100 years ago now. And then Congress passed the Shepard-Towner Maternity Act in 1921, which gave federally financed instruction in maternal and infant health care. So a couple pictures here. Here's a chronology of women's right to vote in national elections. You can see that New Zealand was the first country to do so, and then Australia and Finland and Austria, and the United States is down here. We tied Czechoslovakia. You can see some countries are still working on it. Saudi Arabia, we're looking at you. These are women, female nurses. It says, in the trenches and to the polls. These are U.S. Army nurses who served in World War I. Like I said, Wilson was so impressed by their work that he supported the 19th Amendment. This is the woman's hour has struck. It's a picture kind of showing that women's